user principal names, and trust relationships. In our last nugget, we talked about some things we might want. I talked about attributes that I'd like to change. We all have different things we might want to change. Well, we can't change those things, but at least we can change things in Active Directory in terms of attributes. We also might have things that we might want to change about names. Maybe you've got a name that you don't like. Maybe it sounds kind of funny, or it's, maybe your name is Hilda Spinkenmeyer or something like that. And to those one or two of you out there that actually have that name, no offense. Anyway, so maybe you've got a name you want to change. My wife, her last name was Crum before we got married. That was her maiden name. And so when she got married, she significantly moved up in the world and took on a new name by the last name of Conrad. So now that she's got this aristocratic and highly sophisticated name of Conrad, she's a little happier with her last name. At least she could have been a last name of Rothschild or something. At least then she'd be rich, I guess. But we also have other things in life we want to change. Maybe you don't have anybody you trust, any friends that you trust or something like that. Well, I can't change that for you, but I can change it for you in Active Directory. With a trust relationship, we can trust other domains and access resources from those other domains, or vice versa. So although all of this sounds kind of like an outline for a Dr. Phil book, your stature in life, your name, who you trust, all those attributes about yourself you want to change from our last nugget, it really does some things that we can change, at least in Active Directory, that might make your life a little bit easier as an administrator. Now recall from early in this nugget, I mentioned that my wife moved up in the world by marrying a better name, a name of Conrad, so she no longer is a Crum, she's now a Conrad, and we can change our names in life, from maiden names, for example, to married names. So we can also change our names in Active Directory if we want to. We can kind of change your last name if you want. So for example here, I've got two trees, nuggetlab.com and activesource.local in the same forest. Now the thing is, I can log on to nuggetlab.com and that's not too big of an issue. But as we get more child domains or a more complicated namespace, by the time we get down here to the bottom at accounting.phoenix.nuggetlab.com, I've got a user here, Jay Splinkmeyer, at accounting.phoenix.nuggetlab.com, they might have to log on using all of those characters. And that's exactly what they'll have to do if you go to Active Directory Users and Computers. And here I've really only got nuggetlab.com, but I've gone ahead and created Johansson Splinkmeyer. And if I double-click on this and go to the account, you'll see that they can log on with an ampersand followed by the name of the domain. And if they have multiple domains to choose from, or multiple user principal names, that is, to choose from, then they'll be able to select from a drop-down list here when the administrator creates the account. Now, the issue here might be that maybe Jay Splinkmeyer here, and by the way, please forgive the ginormous head that I've created here. I couldn't figure out a way to get all of this on one line unless I made the head really huge. This big androgynous-looking head. Oh, I made a beauty mark. How cute. Anyway, this user is very unhappy. See? Because they have to type in all of that whenever they log on. Now, a lot of users will just choose from the drop-down list for the available domains when they determine that they want to log on. But if this accountant here is an auditor and they're going to a different office every day throughout different parts of the organization and they never know which domain they're going to be in for the computer account when they log on, then they may have to keep picking and choosing. If they have their own computer and they're always sitting at it the same day, they'll probably just choose from the drop-down list because it usually remembers which domain you chose the last time you logged on. But for this kind of a purpose, with the user principal name, this person's going to get frustrated typing all of that in every time. Now let me bring up a couple of issues with this then, and why we might want to change that. Number one is simply for an issue of convenience, and let me just abbreviate that, convenience. Because it would be real nice if Jay Splinkmeyer could just shorten this name to Jay Splinkmeyer at asingledomain.com, even though their user account is way down here in this grandchild of a domain down here. Wouldn't it also be nice if we could shorten their last name? I mean, who wants Splinkmeyer, right? No offense to any of you out there named Splinkmeyer. I'm probably going to get thousands of letters now. Anyway, it would just sure be convenient if we could shorten all of that up for anybody that's going to be using a UPN, or user principal name, to log on. The other issue there would be security. Now, this is not going to be as big of an issue if you're using Exchange smartly anyway, but what could happen is, as long as the user account is down here, if we're not thinking through this, then we might have an Exchange server down here as well, and we would give them an email account of jsplinkmeyer at accounting.phoenix.nuggetlab.com. And there's all kinds of ways in Exchange and in DNS to shorten that to just the root of the domain, for example. I could just give this person Jay Splinkmeyer at nuggetlab.com for their email address, or nuggetlab.org, or nuggetlab.net, or anything else that I want it to be. It doesn't have to be this way unless I've falsely convinced myself that it has to be. But the security issue there is, if we have left it that way for their email address and their user principal name logon, then anytime they send somebody an email, whoever is the recipient of that email instantly knows how this person logs on to their domain. Now all they have to figure out is the password, which is no small issue in and of itself, but we don't want to give away anything if we don't have to, so we don't want to give away how they log on to the domain. And let me also point out where this user principal name appears. It does appear in their user account, and I'm just in the the NuggetLab.com domain here. But anyway, let's go to the account, and we see here that jsplinkmeyer is the user logon name, and then this is the remainder of the user principal name. It just looks like an email address. It really isn't necessarily, but that's just how it looks. Now let's go ahead and take a look at how this person would log on if they were just in NuggetLab.com. So we'll go ahead and make a connection to an XP computer. And then we just type in their name, of course, followed by the password. And then they would have to choose from a drop-down list of, dozens of domains if they might have them here. I've only got the single one, but they might have to choose from a whole bunch of different ones. And if their name of their domain starts with Z, then they inevitably always have to go to the bottom of the list, and this person might get frustrated with that. So they might rather just do jsplinkmeyer @ and as soon as I type in the @ symbol here, the domain grays out because it knows that I'm putting in the domain up here in this list. So now it's going to be jsplinkmeyer @NuggetLab.com. That would be a user principal name way of logging on with my user principal name and password. So there we go. Well, what I can do here is to use Active Directory domains and trust to give a person down in this domain, any user down in this domain, the ability to log on using jsplinkmeyer or whatever their name is @NuggetLab.com instead. Now, I might also run into this situation. People over here in AccuSource.local down in la.accusource.local, they get jealous. They say, hey, we got a long logon name as well. Why can't you do something like that for us? Well, we could do that. We could give them AccuSource.local, but maybe we want to give everybody in the entire forest kind of a unified user principal name to log on with if they want. Well, they say, well, we're AccuSource.local, we're not changing. Well, we're NuggetLab.com, we're not changing. Well, it'll say that in that case, if you guys can't get along, we'll just give you another domain name to log on with, such as, I don't know, why can't we all get along.com or something like that. Or we can just make this simple, we'll just make this, cbtn.com. And that way everybody has a relatively short user principal name to log on. Now, this domain here does not have to be an actual DNS domain. I don't have to have a zone for it. It can be totally fictional. I don't have to have an Active Directory domain for it. Again, it can be totally fictional. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we would do that in Active Directory domains and trusts. What you'll do here is simply go to Active Directory domains and trusts, and this is something you'll do to right-click here at the top. Do not right-click on the domain. You won't get what you want. Right-click right here, and then choose Properties. And then here's where we'll enter in alternative UPN suffixes. Now, I don't have a cbtn.com, but I could do that, cbtn.com. And then I'll just click on Add. Now, I can also still do NuggetLab.com, NuggetLab.com, and I can still add that in. I can still add in AccuSource.local or whatever else I want. You can have multiple ones of these if you want to. If you want to give people also the ability to log on to a certain department. For example, my guy in accounting, maybe he doesn't even know what domain his account is in. Well, we'll just give him accounting.com. So you could do any one of those things as you like, and then we'll just click OK here, and then we'll go ahead and allow that person to log on using whichever item we choose for their user account when we go back into Active Directory users and computers. So now once I'm in this, I can just go to that user's account, and then I can go to the Account tab, and I can give them any of those items that I've just added in for the user principal name. Again, even though I don't have domains by these names, I can still use them. So we told everybody they're going to use cbtnuggets.com. I can give them that one. Or if jsplinkmeyer only knows that he's in the accounting department, I can make it easier and more intuitive for him just by giving him @accounting.com. But we'll stick with cbtnuggets.com for the time being. And then I'll go ahead and click OK. Now let's go ahead and log that user on, and we'll see how they can do so. So now you see here that I'm logging on as jsplinkmeyer @cbtnuggets.com, which is our name-neutral domain that we've put up there. That's our fictional domain with their user's password, of course. Now they click OK, and it's going to log them on just fine. So now no longer is our person so sad because they have to log on with that big old gigantic name. Now they're much happier. And horribly disfigured. But anyway, you get the idea. Now we've got a much shorter name that we can use to log on with. Were you an NT4 domain admin? I'm sorry if you were. Anyway, well, we had an NT4, and these all represent NT4 domains. I'll just make 5 of these. is trust relationships that you had to manually create. So if I had a resource down in this domain that I wanted everybody to be able to access, a file share or something, then I would have to create trust relationships, so I'd point an arrow to that domain, and the pointed part of the arrow points to the domain where we are trusting the users and the groups and the accounts that we have up there. So now that I trust that user, I'll allow them to access my file share. So we'd have to trust all of these domains like this. Now we still have to create those kinds of relationships, those manual relationships at times, within Windows Server 2003. That's going to be known mostly as an external trust now, but it's not as often that we have to create those kinds of things. Now, conversely, if we had resources in each one of these domains that we wanted to access, so that we'd have to allow other people to trust our users, then we'd have to create another arrow the opposite direction, or another trust the opposite direction. And then, likewise, I guess it goes this way, likewise, if we had resources between all these domains, we want to have a complete trust relationship so anybody in any domain could access a resource in any of the other domains for which they were granted access, then we'd have to create a whole bunch more arrows, and you see where this is going. This gets really complicated really fast, and then I have to create trust between these relationships over here, because this is not a transitive trust relationship. Just because this domain trusts this domain, and just because this domain trusts this domain, doesn't mean that this domain automatically trusts this domain, or vice versa. No, we have to manually create that trust relationship as well. So they're non-transitive trust relationships, and it's extremely messy. If I remember right, Compaq, back before they merged with HP and back when they had NT4 domains, had hundreds of domains. Can you imagine the Visio diagram or whatever it is that they use to document all those trust relationships? It's probably not a Visio diagram big enough in the world for that. Well, fortunately, in Windows Server 2003, we have a much simpler trust relationship that we can build. Because you see now, and you will recall this from when I was creating domains in our second nugget in this series where I was using DC Promo, now we'll see that when we create our first domain in the forest, this is the root of this tree and it's the root of the forest, then it's kind of a self-contained domain. If that's all we've got, then that's necessarily all that we have. However, if I create a child domain like this down here, when I use DC Promo to install this domain controller, the first one down here, I tell it that I want it to join an existing tree in an existing forest. And when I tell it to join that existing tree and existing forest, it automatically builds this trust relationship, which is both transitive and two-way. So that if I create yet another child domain underneath this domain, then this will also automatically trust this domain as well as this domain here as well. Likewise, in a forest relationship, I don't have to stay within the same namespace here. I can create a totally different namespace, but it's still a member of the same forest when I install the first domain controller over here. And I'll specify that I want it to join an existing forest. It's just a different namespace is all. It also has a trust relationship here, and it's also fully transitive so that any user or resource down in this domain can be accessed or can access another domain in any of the other part of the entire forest throughout this entire structure. And by the way, there's also actually a name for all of this stuff. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. There's several different trust types that you can have. The first one is the tree root trust relationship. That's where I have the trust relationship right here between these two trees that are in the same forest. This is the tree root trust relationship. Another one that we have is the parent-child trust relationship, which I also described right here. Parent-child. That's not politically correct. That's parent-child trust relationship that we have going on there. And then there's a shortcut trust. Let's go ahead and give that a little bit more explanation. You see, here I've got a child domain way down here in the belly of this domain relationship, way down here. And I want to access a resource. Here's a user. Here's a resource that I want to access way over here in this other domain. Now, can I do that? Well, sure I can, because I have trust relationships that are transitive all the way up through my forest relationship. The problem is, what if I've got a 56K WAN link right here? Because this LA office is separated from the AccuSource.local office by a really slow link. Well, what's going to happen is, in order to access that resource, I have to walk the tree. I have to take my credential, and I'm going to pass it up the tree. So I'm going to walk the tree through the trust path until it finally gets over here. Now, each one of the domain controllers in each one of these domains is going to forward on or pass on the credentials until it finally gets down to the appropriate domain. Now, the problem here is twofold. Number one, it just takes time for it to go all the way up and down the tree relationship, especially if it's a pretty deep tree relationship. Number two, I got a 56K WAN link here, which might take a little bit of time for that to happen. So what I could do instead is I can go ahead and create a shortcut trust relationship. Now, it's not going to directly avoid this 56K WAN link if I only have one connection there. But if I have another physical connection, then I might be able to use a faster physical connection here. Maybe it's a 512 K-link between these two offices. Maybe we built that because we exchange a lot of resources back and forth. We do some file transfers and stuff like that. Now what I could do here then is I could create a trust relationship so that this trust here, this domain here, trusts this domain. And this would be an outgoing trust so that this is a trusting domain. This is the trusted domain. And we call this an outgoing trust. Microsoft has used that term now with current versions of Windows to avoid the confusion between trusting and trusted and all that kind of stuff. So now it's a one-way trust relationship, and I can access resources right here because this user account has been applied to the ACL or the access control list here and can access that resource. Now likewise, if I have a resource down here that I want to access by using a user account up here, then I could create the trust going the opposite direction. And now this domain trusts users and groups in this domain. By the way, this is only going to grant access to resources for which we explicitly grant access just the way you would in a single domain. So by creating these trust relationships, we're not automatically giving away the farm and throwing open the barn doors so that everybody in any domain can access all of our resources. You still have to use the access control list to manually grant those resources. And finally, let me point out that, remember when I first created this trust relationship down here, that was an outbound trust relationship from the perspective of this domain. Likewise, when I create this trust relationship from the perspective of this domain, that is an inbound trust relationship because we're trusting users from here inbound into our domain to access our resources. Now, another kind of trust relationship you might have would be a realm trust relationship. That might be where I have an MIT Kerberos version 5 realm. You see, in Microsoft parlance, we call our realms domains. They're Kerberos domains, however. They're Kerberos realms in reality. Just because Microsoft uses Kerberos version 5 for all our authentication. But maybe we've got a university that we've got a project going on we're doing some research with, and that university out here doesn't use Microsoft's Active Directory. They use a Kerberos version 5 realm. However, we want to exchange resources back and forth so you can still create trust relationships one way or the other, or both ways if you want to, with that external domain. Very similar to that would also be an external trust relationship. And for that, maybe I've got an old NT4 domain out here that's just hanging on, and we can't seem to get it converted. Maybe there's a political battle or whatever. But we still have to access resources back and forth. It doesn't have anything to do with my domain, doesn't have anything to do with my forest, so I'm just going to create my old style NT4 trust relationship here. That would simply be an external trust relationship. And then finally, we can have a forest trust relationship. Now, before we go about creating trust relationships, let me also point out that you don't need to worry about administrators from other domains surreptitiously gaining access to resources in your domain. For example, maybe this la.accusource.local domain here is very protective of their resources. Maybe we've had political battles in the past, and we don't like the people up here in NuggetLab.com because one time they did something that broke our WAN link and we couldn't communicate with the home office for a week or something like that. So we've got this political battle going on or something like that, and we're saying we're afraid to create trust relationships so that they can access our resources because we just know they'll goof them up. Well, that's not necessarily going to happen. You can create a trust relationship between these domains, for example, and that doesn't give these administrators up here any kind of access to this domain down here, any administrative access. They will only be able to do what I allow them to do. If I add the domain admins from this domain up here into my administrators group down here on a domain controller down here, then of course they're going to have access. But that has to be something that I manually choose to do. Creating a trust relationship by itself doesn't do anything. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can create our trust relationships from the Administrative Tools menu, and again going to Active Directory Domains and Trusts. Now first let's just observe that I do have two domains in this forest, and as a result they both appear. These are two tree root domains in the same forest, and they already have intrinsic trust relationships to one another. And just to allay any concerns that there might be any subdomains, you only click the pluses to show that there's nothing underneath there. They're just two tree root domains here. Now what I might want to do, however, with NuggetLab.com, for example, maybe I want to create a trust relationship with a partnership. And this is often what you're going to do if you have another company that maybe you have a common government contract with, for example, and maybe it's a defense contractor. One of the companies is working on the guidance system, the other company is working on the payload, different things like that. So you have to really work hand in glove together, even though you're separate companies. So what I could do with NuggetLab.com, for example, then, is to right-click here and choose Properties, and then I go to the Trust tab. Now, although I want to create a forest trust relationship with another domain called Accusource.local, I first have to make sure that it can resolve Accusource.local, and I also have to make sure that Accusource.local can resolve NugaLab.com. So on both of the respective DNS servers for each domain, I'm going to go into the properties of the server here, and having done that, I'm going to go to the Forwarders tab. Now, for the Forwarders tab, I'm going to create a new conditional forward, is what we call this. I could also choose all other DNS domains here, and if I want to use Accusource.local's DNS servers to resolve any other domains, whether it's in my own organization or outside of my organization on the public internet, I can just enter in the IP address for Accusource.local's DNS server there. In my case, I'm just going to enter in a conditional forwarder, so that's going to say that anytime I get a query for Accusource.local, then what I want you to do is to send a query up to 10.10.10.4. And then that server, which is a DNS server in Accusource.local, and I'll click on Add here, that will then resolve that name for us. So I'll click OK here, and then I would do a similar thing over on Accusource.local so that I can make sure that it had a conditional forward to NugaLab.com. Now once I've set up that prerequisite, and once I've made sure that the Forest functional level is set to Windows Server 2003, and then I will be able to go ahead and create a Forest Trust relationship by clicking New Trust down there at the bottom that you just saw me do. And from this point, I'll just go ahead and next through the wizard, I'm going to enter in the name of Accusource.local because that's the domain that I'm trying to establish a trust relationship with. And then I'll go ahead and click on Next. And then I specify whether this is an external trust. That's what I would do, for example, if I was working with NT4 domains. In this case, however, it's not going to be that kind of a relationship because I want it to be a transitive trust relationship. An external trust is a non-transitive trust relationship so that I could not in turn trust any child domains for this trust relationship. In this case, a forest trust, again, will work all the way through the trust relationship, both up and down. So I'll go ahead and click on Next here after having clicked on forest. And then I can choose to make it a two-way trust relationship, one-way incoming, so that users in the domain that I specified, in other words, Accusource.local, can be authenticated in my domain, and I would then allow them access to various resources, or one-way outgoing, which means that the Accusource.local domain could potentially trust resources or trust users from my domain. And the descriptions that you see after each one of these pretty well describes accurately what it does. I'm just going to do it two-way, so it does it both directions, both incoming and outgoing, both at the same time. I'm just going to kind of kill two birds with one stone. You can do them one at a time, but why do that? Just to kill two birds with one stone here. Click on Next, and then I can specify whether I want to create the trust relationship in this domain only, and then I might just leave it up to the other domain administrator over in Accusource.local to create the trust relationship on their side. But if I have the credentials with me, if I have a username and a password from Accusource.local that would give me this capability, then I can go ahead and do that here as well for both this domain and the specified domain. Since I have that information, I'll go ahead and select that and click on Next. And again, this is going to kind of kill two birds with one stone because when you create a trust relationships, you have to build it on both sides of things. If I've got an outgoing trust here on my domain, then on the destination domain of Accusource.local, another administrator has to build an incoming trust. If I have an incoming trust on my side of the domain, then the administrator on the other domain has to create an outgoing trust. So again, I've got credentials for both domains. I'll just go ahead and click on Next. Now I need to specify credentials for Accusource.local. This needs to be an account that has membership in something called the Incoming Forest Trust Builders Security Group in order to create this forest trust. If it's going to be an incoming trust only. If it's going to be something like I'm about to create here, where I'm going to create it both sides of it myself here, to create this forest trust, I'm going to need to be an enterprise admin in both forests. So for Accusource.local, I've created a same username and password over in that domain just to make it simple for our purposes. That's also going to be a trainer account with the same password. And that account in Accusource.local is an enterprise admin, giving it capability to generate this trust relationship. Now, we addressed this issue a little while ago in a different nugget, but forest-wide authentication, which is the default selection, would allow me to walk the entire tree. So, for example, if these were initially two separate forests, and we did not have this trust relationship right here initially, and that's what I'm building, then what's going to happen is when the trust relationship is finished, we're going to have the same kind of trust relationship as if they were originally part of the same forest. We can walk the tree all the way up and down this thing. And let me get back to my little wizard here. That would be forest-wide authentication. There are some exceptions to it. because they still won't share a configuration naming context, but we could leave it at this setting. We could also do selective authentication, which allows us to select specifically which servers within a specific domain we want people to be able to access resources on. So that's just a much more selective item, is the way it implies in the name there. If you choose forest-wide authentication here, you want to change it to selective authentication later on, you can do that, however. Now this next dialog box looks almost identical to the first one that I saw, except that this is for the destination specified forest. Now let me go back a second. This one was for my local forest. In other words, for NugaLab.com, we're giving them forest-wide authentication. For the destination specified forest, AccuSource.local, we're also going to make it forest-wide authentication. But again, of course, we could choose selective. That's pretty much it. We just next and finish, and that's all we really have to it. We can also confirm the trust relationship. So I'll say, yes, I want to confirm the outgoing trust. This is always, a good idea just to make sure that you got it working. And I'll go ahead and confirm the incoming trust as well. And then once we've done that, we'll see that we can also route authentication name suffixes. And what does this look like? Hey, this is the stuff that I created earlier. The cbtn.com, that was one of those UPN suffixes that I'd created. You see, you can use a UPN suffix on a computer that is a member of AccuSource.local, and I can still use it across the forest to still authenticate my user. So that's still handy. I can use the UPN suffixes anywhere within the entire forest trust relationship now. Then I'll go ahead and click on Next and Finish, and that's pretty much it. Now I have a trust relationship. Then once that's done, we see that we have a forest trust type relationship, and if we go to the properties, this is informational messages here, we can also go to name suffix routing. That means that anytime that someone tries to log on using one of the domain computers in NugaLab.com, and the user logs on using this kind of a suffix, then it will automatically route that to the AccuSource.local forest for authentication. And this is what we looked at in a previous nugget, where you can make forest-wide authentication like we've already got here by default, or selective authentication to more granularly specify which servers and domains you want users to be able to gain access to. Now let me also point out that once I create this forest trust relationship here, and we can access resources all the way up and down the tree, it is not a transitive trust relationship. So just because AccuSource.local now trusts NugaLab.com, and because NugaLab.com already trusted CBTNuggets.com because they were in the same forest to begin with, that does not mean that AccuSource.local now automatically and intrinsically trusts CBTNuggets.com. If I want to create a trust relationship here, then I would have to create either a separate trust relationship just between these two domains, or another forest trust relationship between AccuSource.local and CBTNuggets.com. And we can even see the fact of that in this interface. If I go to CBTNuggets.com and go to its properties, we see that in the trust, it only trusts NugaLab.com. It's not transitive all the way over to AccuSource.local. Now finally, let me point out that by going back to the trust tab from my NugaLab.com domain, if I want to remove this trust, we decided we don't really like these people anymore, or something like that, or business relationship has ended, I'll just click remove, and then I can again remove it just from this local domain or from both sides of the domain. Just depends on whether or not I have credentials for that other domain, and I do. So I'll go ahead and click on that, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove the outgoing trust with that domain. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove the incoming trust with AccuSource.local as well, and I would just simply do the same thing, and again, I'll do that from both sides of the relationship. And that's pretty much it. In this nugget, we continued our discussion of what we want, and although I can't change your own last name, we can change the last name, quote-unquote, if you will, for Active Directory so that we can make logons much simpler and more intuitive for the users. We also talked about trust relationships. There's several different kinds of trust relationships, and we talked about each one of those. And in demonstration, we took a look at how to create a forest trust relationship. It's pretty easy now with Windows Server 2003. There's a handy little widget that guides you through it, and it creates a trust relationship very easily for you, especially if you have credentials for both sides of the trust relationship. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.